So let's continue with what we started last week. So this will be both review as well as showing you additional features. I'll go ahead and select my new file. If you want to follow along, you can. If you would rather just watch, that's okay too. It depends. Sometimes if you try to follow along, what will happen is that I'll do something and you will be looking at the keyboard, and then you look back up and you go, oh my gosh, what did he do? And I'm happy to repeat, so it doesn't, that's fine too. So let's start with two simple shapes. And then I used some type the other day with the shape hints, but they don't, it doesn't have to be type. I mean, it could be anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a circle, and the circle is going to morph into a square. Very basic. Okay. So I'll start with a basic oval tool. And if we look at the timeline, we know in layer 1, we start with a single frame project. And this is what kind of frame? Can anybody tell me? What kind of keyframe?
Blank.
You have, right, blank keyframe. So it is a keyframe, and it's a blank keyframe because you see the little white. And a blank keyframe means it's just a placeholder. It holds a place in time. As soon as you have something on the stage, or even doesn't have to be on the stage, it can be over to the side, you know, off stage, it's still, now you will see a black dot here, and that means that that's regular keyframe. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and remove the stroke, and the fill I'm going to make a nice bright red. So right over here, I'm going to go ahead and make a nice bright red dot. Notice how it changed from a blank keyframe to a keyframe, because it does it automatically. Now what I'm going to do is I want this to morph into a square. So remember, when you want something to happen, you have to, and it's going to happen over time, you have to ask yourself two things. What do I want to happen? So I want it to morph from a circle into a square. That's the first thing. The second thing is, over what period of time do I want it to take place? In this class, I typically use a 1 second rule, you know, or after 20 frames, because remember, we're using 20 frames per second. If you happen to use another frame rate, that's fine. Just remember, don't change it after your project's done, or it will mess everything up. So I decided that I want to change it from a circle to a square after 1 second, or 20 frames. So I select the 20 frame, and I insert, because I want it changed to a square, insert timeline, blank keyframe. Now it looks like the first one disappears, and it does in time, but it doesn't in my project, because now I'm in a different place in time, and notice that I have a placeholder here, and from frame 19 through 1, or 1 through 19, I have the circle. Okay. If I want to place the square exactly on top of that circle, remember, what I can use is I can click here and click on onion skinning, and that allows me to see back in time, just as to place what I need to place. And then I can, you know, for alignment purposes. In this particular instance, I really don't care. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make my square over here. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to click on the rectangle tool, and instead of red, I'm going to make it a nice bright green, and I'll click over here. If I want to see where that is relative to it, I can. So maybe I do. Maybe I want to make sure that this is just aligned nicely to one another. And maybe I want to click on this one and move this over a bit. So one's at one end and one's at the other end. And so what I want to happen now is that I want this circle to morph into this square, and as it does, it's going to move from point A to point B. It's also going to change color as it moves from point A to point B. It will morph automatically. So to do that, you need to do one of two things. You need to either select your layer just by clicking on it. And because I only have 2 keyframes, it selects all. When you do that, it selects all the frames on that layer. But I only have 2 keyframes here, so it's not a problem. If I had additional frames down here and I didn't want them selected, I would just click any one of the frames in between these 2 keyframes to add my tween. To add the tween, you have to have the properties panel visible. And you'll notice at the moment there is no tween added. The next question is, because there's only 2 different kinds of tweens, what kind of tween do you add? And when we get the symbols, this will be can get confusing if you're not careful. But right now, we're looking at a shape object, correct? And we can tell it's a shape object because we see that selection mesh when it's selected. All right? So that means I'm going to add a shape tween. If I add a motion tween by accident, watch what happens. The background of the frames is kind of a lavender color, which is the color that's used for motion tweens. But more important, it will determine that something is wrong, is instead of seeing that nice that arrow along here, I see a dotted line or broken line. So that broken line tells me there's something wrong with the tween, that I've applied a tween. The color tells me that I applied a motion tween, but there's something wrong. So what I need to do is I need to decide, and I know that I'm going to try, okay, I'll try a shape tween instead. And now you'll notice, oh wow, look at that. I have the green for the shape tween, and it's telling me that this is correct because I see that nice solid arrow. And now I can scrub from frame 1 through 10 and look at how it's morphing from the circle to the square. Now as I do that, notice that it rotates. Well, maybe I don't want it to rotate. I just want it to, as the circle slides and it transfers or transforms into a square, I just want it to slide across. I don't want it to slightly rotate. So what would I need to do? I would need to add a shape hint, wouldn't I? And maybe 2 shape hints. Probably no more than 3, but 2 would be ideal. Okay, at least. So to do that, you click on the first keyframe. And then we can go to modify, shape, and we add shape hint. And when we do so, you'll see in the middle of my circle a red A. So what I'm going to do is move this in the upper left-hand corner, and then now I'm going to click on frame 20, and I'm going to move this on the upper left-hand corner. And for some strange reason, see, it's not. Let me go back again. Pull it off. It's not working. It should turn to an amber and then a green, and it doesn't like what I've done. So I'm going to go back to modify, shape, and remove. Won't let me do that either. Hold on. Let's go back here. Modify, shape, remove all hints. And let's try it again. Select first frame. Sometimes it's a little quirky, so we'll try again. Modify, shape, add shape hint. Move it up here. Sort of pops in place. Click down here. Move it up here. What if I move it over here? What if I move it here? Doesn't like it. Okay, well I'm going to scrub through, and it is working. Why it didn't change to green, I don't know. See how it's not twirling anymore? But it still is doing something kind of wonky that I don't like. It actually looks worse. So maybe what I should do is move this over like so, and let's scrub through here. And that doesn't work either. So let me move here to the top. Oh boy. So sometimes things don't work out so well. That just looks about the same as it did before, huh? That's what I want. So really I only need one shape hint. See how it's no longer spinning? Why this is not green, I don't know. But it is working when I scrub through it. Huh. Yeah, let me go ahead and hit test move. It's control and test movie and see what we get. Yeah, it isn't working. So it isn't. So if I pull it off and I come over here and I pull it off, I go back over here. Go ahead here. Not working. Oh well, so much for shape hints, huh?
Both shapes have to have the shape hint?
Because what it's doing is a matching point with point.
If you leave it in the center, like you were generally saying, will it do anything? Or is it
Not really. It'll just do what it did before, but it's not turning green. If I select here, what happened to my shape hints? They went away. That's weird. Okay, let's go again. Select frame 1. Modify shape. Remove all hints. Try it again. One more time, and if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. I mean, it's not perfect. It doesn't always work, and this is a clear example of that. So let's try again. Insert, modify, shape, add shape hint. I'm going to move it over. Let's go to here. Now it works. Why it worked that time? I don't know. It's still sort of working and sort of not working, huh? It shouldn't do that. It shouldn't pop. Why would it do that? Huh. That is very bizarre. I have no explanation. So let's test it. And it's actually going from a small shape to, the shape hints aren't working at all. So I better,
With the hints, it's not working.
yeah. So I'm just going to get rid of them. I'm going to go back to select the first frame, modify shape, and remove all hints. Now let's try it. See, now it's morphing. But so that we won't labor too much on the shape hints, but what I can do is that I can also change size over time. I can change alpha over time. I can change a lot of properties over time. So what I can do here is I can select this one, let's select the free transform tool, and let's reduce it. Okay. Just that keyframe. Now watch what happens. As I scrub through, it's also morphing and it's changing size. What if at the end I want the alpha, I want it to not only morph from a circle to a square, and I want it to get larger, but I want it to fade out. Okay, well, let's bring up color. And at the last keyframe that's selected, let's change the alpha and reduce it to maybe 10%. See how it's faded to almost nothing? So now when I hit Command Return, see how it fades? So look at all the properties I've changed over time, and it changes it automatically. If I decide at any point in time that maybe I didn't want this to be here, I wanted it to be down here, and I hit Command Return, notice it automatically updates the morph from point A to point B. What if I want it in the middle of all of this to transform into another shape? I can do that. I can click on frame 10, for example, and I can say Insert Timeline, and I can either add a keyframe or I can insert a blank keyframe. I'm just going to add a keyframe here. And now in place of this, okay, or let's just move it up like so. And now watch what happens. It goes up and it goes down. Okay. If I decide that this is all happening too quickly, how can I, without changing the frame rate, how can I slow it down?
Insert blank.
Just add more. I could add more frames. What I can do, if I wanted to have the rate of this, I could click this frame 20, move it to frame 40. I can take frame 10 and move it to frame 20. Now let's hit Command Return. Notice how it's slowed down. Likewise, if you want to speed things up, you bring them closer together in the timeline. Okay. Now, in addition to that, I can do some other things. I can come back here, and I can, let's deselect this. And I'm going to come back here and make this 100% again. And in the middle, I'm going to, I need to also change that one too. So let's change that as well. Got to remember, if you change one and you want them all to change, that's fine. You have to change them. Let's move over the edge, and I can pull that out, pull this out. Now watch what happens. Okay. So now it's morphing from a circle to kind of a flower, star-like shape to a square. It's changing color over time, it's moving over time, it's changing scale over time. And all of those tweens, all of the frames in between are being changed automatically. That's what Flash will do for you. The next step that we're going to take is to be able to import files, and then we're going to convert files to symbols. And what we can do with a number of these is that we can put these animations inside symbols so they're self-contained, so that they can be used over and over and over again. That's another thing that we'll want to do. For example, what if you wanted to have snowflakes fall? Would you animate each individual one, or would you just do one and then bring them out multiple times, and that would automatically work? There are more efficient ways of working. That's what symbols will allow you to do. Does this make sense? Even though the shape hint did not work? Okay, let's, I'm going to create another new document here. And I want to show you how to import files. It's pretty straightforward. And the kinds of files that we will be importing will be Illustrator files. If you like to use Illustrator, we can import Photoshop files. We can import additional SWF files. We can import, later on we'll import music files. We can import video, we can import animation, all sorts of things. Right now, just still images. While it will allow us to import Photoshop files, I strongly recommend that you don't do it, because it will compress those files and convert them to JPEGs, and it will, you will rely on Flash to do the optimization for you. And we spent time in class going through the steps of optimizing files. I think you'll get better results if you do that yourself first and import the JPEGs. Okay? Or pings. Pings work equally as well, because those pings will be converted to JPEGs in Flash. But if you wish to import an image that's partially transparent or the background is transparent, that's a good way to go. And it will also allow you to import GIFs as well. So to do that, we'll go to File, File menu, and select Import. And now we have an option. We can import the stage, import to library, and if you have an external library, you can import to that. Or if we wish to import video, we can import that. Okay. Well, I just want to import the stage for right now. And it spins and it comes up, and I'm going to look on my desktop, and what I did on my desktop is that I should have a lesson folder here that I took from the CS4 book, and I hope that this is it. That's not it. Okay, what other lesson folder do I have up here? Those are exercise files, lessons. Hold on. Where is it? Lessons. There we go. Okay. This should be it. I have a start file and an end file. You'll notice that I have a background image that was created in Photoshop. And when you see some many elaborate Flash documents and you wonder, my gosh, how did they do that in Flash? Oftentimes they didn't do it in Flash. They did a good part of the preliminary work in Photoshop or Illustrator and just simply imported the file. So I'll go ahead and import this. And we can see that we have multiple layers here that were part of our Photoshop document. And it asks us, do you want to place layers at original position? Yes, I want to do that. Says, do I want to set stage size to same size as Photoshop canvas? Normally, I would say no. What a better way to work would be to establish first your parameters in Flash to decide what size stage you want, and then have an idea. Okay, my frame rate is going to be 20 frames per second. My stage size is going to be 500 by 450 or whatever it's going to be. And then as you're developing your images in Photoshop, you have that stage size in mind. You know how big it's going to be. Don't convert the stage size to your Photoshop file. Do it the other way around. But I do want to make sure, since it will import the layers, I can go ahead and click OK. And you can see that not only did it take and import the image from Photoshop, but it brought in all the layers as well. So I can animate this if I wish. It has both of them selected, but I can select this one. And notice that this can be animated. again, the only downside to this is that when it compresses the file later, it will assume that you want to use just the default compression settings. But it can be a nice feature because maybe I want this to fade in over time. Or maybe I want it to move, do a variety of things, get larger over time and fade in over time. So that can be pretty nice. Let me go ahead and open up another file. This one I'm going to import to the library instead. And what you should do is I'm going to go ahead and open the library. And even though I imported to the stage, as soon as you import, it automatically puts it in the library, and you can see that I have a background PSD file. So here's my flare, and here is the background image. So both of those are separate images inside here. And they are bitmap, and it tells me they're bitmap. That's how I know that. When do you need to change these? When do you need to convert them into something else? That we'll let you know that we will be doing that later. Okay. Right now they can remain bitmap files. They don't need to be converted to do anything because they're just going to remain static at the moment. Okay. So now I'm going to import another file in here, but instead I'll import it, instead of directly to the stage, I will import it into the library. So you can do either one. You can go File, Import, and now I'll import to the library. Go back to the same, and I'll select, this time I'm going to bring in characters.ai, which is an Illustrator document. Import to library. Okay. It's taking a little bit of effort here. Shows me that I'm importing an external file. Now, this is where it gets really hairy. I don't know that I would want to do this. Do you want all of these component parts? I wouldn't. No. So this is what I'm going to do instead. I'm going to cancel this. And I'm going to go, because I don't want all those little parts. I mean, that will really clutter your library. Instead, I'm going to open Illustrator. How many people have used Illustrator before? Anybody? A few people? Okay. And the rest of you haven't. You don't have to know it for this class. It just doesn't matter. But in Illustrator, you can export or you can save your file as an SWF file. So that would be the direction I would go. You can also export it as a JPEG. You can also export it as any number of other file formats. It will take a moment for it to open. And I'm not going to open any file. Well, I am going to open. I'm going to open my existing Illustrator file. And I'm going to go back to my desktop. I'm going to scroll down to where I have my lessons folder, folder 3, start file, and I want characters. So I'm going to go ahead and open. Okay, so here are the characters. Lots of little shapes, huh? If I want these, and I don't think it would be good practice to keep these as one file. They're separate characters, so I'll make them separate files. So what I would do instead would be select one, and I will cut it, and I'll create a new file. And I probably should have named it character 1, and I'll go ahead and paste it inside here. And I'll go ahead and I'm going to do a file save as, just as we would with Photoshop. And I'll name it character 1, char 01. And I'm going to put it in my lesson folder, lesson 3. I'll put it in my start file. And I'll save it just as we did with the Photoshop document. I'm going to save it as an AI file. This will be my original. Okay. Create PDF, embed ICC profiles, all that good stuff. Now I'm ready to do one of two things. I can do a save as, or I can save a copy. inside here, and you'll notice that there are a number of options for us. We can save an EPS file, an Illustrator template, a PDF, so on and so forth. That's not the kind that I want. What I want to do is I want to go to File and I want to export. Now when I export, you'll notice I can save this as a bitmap, which is fine. Targa, I can save it as a JPEG. I'm going to save it as a Flash file. So go ahead and export. Now, it gives me lots of options here. AI file to SWF file. Version, Flash player, we can go backwards. Options, clip to artboard size, preserve appearance, compress file, export symbols in the panel, export text as outlines, that would be a good idea. Ignore kerning for text, include metadata, there's protect from import. There's lots of options that we have here. I don't need to select any of these. I'm just going to click OK. Now I'm going to switch back to Flash, and I'm going to go File, Import once again, and I will import to Library. And now you'll see I have character 1 SWF. Okay. I can import to Library, and here we have it. Now notice what it does. It brought it in as a graphic symbol, which is really pretty cool. Because if and when we get Flash 4 in here, we could animate this guy. We could apply bones to it, which is pretty cool. We can do the same here. We can animate them, but it's more difficult. And we can break it down into its subparts and bring it in. So now I can actually add this onto the stage. My recommendation is, you'll notice how we have layer 1, which is a blank. We can remove that, or I can go ahead and move it up. Because when I imported the Photoshop file with separate layers, it automatically put them on separate layers inside Flash. And I want to keep that. That's a nice feature. Because if I want them to animate them independently of one another, I can. Even if I don't, it's a good practice to keep them independent. I want this guy to be independent of these guys too, especially if you animate them. So I'll name this guy character 1, this layer. Okay, and I'm going to lock the other layers so I don't accidentally place it on here. And now I can bring him on stage too. Now he can be animated. We can move him across the stage. We can do all sorts of things to it. But I've imported Photoshop files and I have imported Illustrator files. The best way to import either one, I don't like, I have mixed feelings. What I do like about the Photoshop is that it imported all of my layers. And if my intent was to animate parts of those, notice that it kept the registration perfect, kept the size intact, it looks beautiful, you know, just the way I would hope it would look. That's the nice part. I'm not so sure about the compression. So it might be 6 of one, a half a dozen of the other. With Illustrator, on the other hand, I don't recall what the book says, but my feeling is, because you don't want all of those little parts to be imported into Flash. Although if that is what you want, go to it, but it will clutter your library. My recommendation would be to import it or export it first as a SWF file and import it. Okay. Now, yes. I can't hear. I'm sorry. You're relying on Flash to compress it. You're relying on Flash to optimize it properly. And you can, if you recall, in the first week when we went over and we looked at all the similar files and assumed that maybe 80% optimization was correct. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe you can get away with more compression. Maybe you have to get away with less. But you're relying on Flash to do that. That's all. Judging by the quality of the image, I think it looks great. So maybe it's not, in this case, it's not a bad way to go. For right now, as far as importing is concerned, I mean, we can import sound, we can import video, we can import a lot of different things, but for right now, I just want you to be able to know how to import images. Okay? So that seemed pretty straightforward. You can either import to the stage, and it still puts a copy of it inside your library, and that's anytime you drag an element from the library onto the stage, what you are doing is you're bringing an instance of that object onto the stage. You're not bringing in the original. It's always an instance or a copy of it. Okay? That's why you still saw in the library that image. What do I mean by that? What if I want two of these guys on the stage? Do I need to import another one? No. All I have to do is select the element here in my library and bring it out again. So now I have two of them on the stage. That is the advantage to importing elements into your library, is that once you bring those onto the stage, you're just bringing copies of them. So the file size is really, that's added for those copies is minimal. Okay, are we ready to move on to symbols? Okay, and when we get done with symbols this week, I may be jumping ahead a little bit. This is taking probably less time, I thought.
Before we move on, the point that when you said that when we set up a file in Photoshop, incorporation of importing into Flash, about the stage time, I didn't find that.
Oh, well, if you're wondering, if we open up a Photoshop file, let's use my rubber ducky as an example, as I use that for all sorts of samples. It might be the right resolution at 72 pixels per inch. It might be the right file type. It might be all sorts of things might be correct about it, but maybe it's just too big. Probably what I should take note of first before I go over to Photoshop is to look at my properties panel and just click on the stage, and my stage size is 550 by 400 pixels. So to bring in an image any larger than that is pointless. It doesn't make any sense. Right?
Can you also, what determines your stage size in comparison to the web page you're going to put it on? Pre-thinking all of that. Can you?
By default these days, and it's still pretty true, the page size for your website should be about 800 by 600 pixels, 800 wide by 600 deep. That, even for if you're going to design your website for art directors, and they have big monitors, maybe they have a nice big 30-inch monitor, so that you could have a huge web page. But most people today, I don't think I'm unique, have laptops. Laptops are, I think, more prevalent than ever. And that's a pretty tiny, it's generally 15-inch diagonal. So to have 800 by 600 pixel standard web page isn't bad. So 500 by, or 550 by 400 doesn't expand to that entire width, but it comes close. I mean, you only have 25 pixels on either side. Or no, that's not true. That's 800. So you have 100 and some on either side. If you want to make this bigger, if you wanted to make it 650 by 400 or 600 by whatever you can, but it can't be any bigger than your web page.
No, but it could be the 800 by 600.
You could. It could be.
If you just wanted a window that's going to be inside of the page, you pre-think all that. So that's
Right. So you probably wouldn't make it any bigger than 800 by 600. Typically, they're a little bit smaller, but that governs everything. You know, what if you're going to incorporate that? What size image do you need? So if we go back to Photoshop, and I file open, and I think on my desktop I have rubber duckies here somewhere. In fact, I'm sure I do. We'll open this one here. Okay, so if I look at the image size, it tells me it's 250 by 273. It's 72 pixels per inch. That's a pretty good size. I know that that will fit on my stage just fine because my stage is 550 by 400. If I want it to fill the entire stage, it's too small.
okay.
But if I go back and I open up the original one, file open, let's go to the hard drive, let's go to applications. This is where I got it. Would be in my Photoshop folder.
So you cannot resize images inside of Flash. Like
You can, but I don't recommend it. What I should do is bring one in and resize it, and you'll see what it looks like. With bitmap images, Photoshop and Flash both will allow you to enlarge them and reduce them. And you can to a certain extent, but I would be very careful about that, especially enlarging them. So, yes?
So it's a matter of practicality for most design considerations. Your 550 by
400?
400 would appear like this small only on
I can show you an example. Question is the 550 by 400. What would it look like if we go to my website? Now, I have part of this hidden. The background blends with the background of my page. But you can see, you know, I have my images here. I have the titles or in the explanation of each of these images below. So this entire project is about this big. This is 550 by 400, and this is designed 800 by 600. So if I were to resize this about like so, this is about 800 by 600. And this is the image size of my Flash project within it, which is 550 by 400. Now, notice that if you made it 600 deep, for a splash page that might work, but because my navigation isn't within the Flash of my website, I have to allow space for that. Among other things, I have a little home button down here. So
you design the entire thing for 800, 600 to accommodate the Flash.
right. Okay, a little bit of video in there. So my hope is that you'll be able to have something similar to this. Okay. Mm-hmm. You may have to, okay, the question is, if I wanted to bring in the rubber ducky and use it as a background image, and maybe I also wanted to bring in another version, or I wanted to have a version of the rubber ducky as a smaller version, it might reduce okay, I would check it and see. So let's bring in the large version first and reduce it, a copy of it, and see how it looks. To start with a small one and make it larger later on won't work. I mean, I can almost guarantee that.
So it would appear different.
Huh?
So by thinking of different file sizes would appear to be different in Flash.
It will. Yeah. So I will just save this one as is. This is currently a zip file. So let's look at image mode, make sure it's RGB, that's good. And I'll do a file save as, or save for web rather, and we'll, it should be 72 pixels per inch. I believe it is. Yeah, it is. Okay. And I'll just save it as a JPEG. High quality, looks pretty good. We'll go ahead and save that. And I'll save it in my folder that I had set up already here for desktop for importing images. Lesson 3, my start file. It's in here. Here's my ducky. Because this will be a part of my Flash document, the naming system that I explained isn't critical, but I do think it is a good habit to get into, because when you do incorporate those images into your HTML page, it will be important. It's just a good habit to use the naming conventions that we talked about before. So I'll go ahead and I'll save a copy of that inside that folder. And let's go back and let's bring this one on stage. And let's see, file. I should probably go ahead and lock this layer, and let's go ahead and add another layer and put the rubber ducky on another layer. File, and I'll just go ahead, import to stage. And here's my ducky JPEG. I'll import it. See how big it is relative to the rest? Now what I can do is we can free transform it, and let's resize it. And it looks just fine. If you're going to use it multiple sizes, why not? If you're not, and you only plan on using it this size, then what I would recommend that you do is scale it ahead of time, because when you import it to the library, the file size doesn't change when you scale it on stage. Does that make sense? So if I have a relatively large file that I brought in there, it stays large.
So you would import it in Times Square with the white background, or you just import the yellow background?
I can. A better way to do that would be in Photoshop to remove the background, save it as a ping or GIF, import one of those two files, and it will be perfect. I can do that here, but if you recall, it doesn't look that good. Photoshop would be a better place to do that. And remember, if you delete it from the stage, you don't have to import it again because it's still in your library. Now, if I import the other one, let me bring in the ping. So let's go. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead, file, import to stage again, and I should have, maybe I didn't, I guess I didn't save it yet, did I? Let's hide this. My desktop is getting cluttered again. Here we go. I'm going to save a copy of this inside my lesson folder. So this will be ducky ping. None, I guess. We'll just leave that. Let's import this one. I'll import to stage. There's the ducky ping. Okay, see how it kept the transparency? But now watch what happens when I enlarge it. See how we get the jaggies and it starts to get a little blurry. I mean, it allows you to enlarge it, but it's not a good idea because then you get an image that's less than satisfactory. That's the nature of bitmap images. You can't really scale them. I can't tell the direction of the sound, but I can tell that somebody's computer has crashed, and I hear can anybody hear the fans going in front of theirs? It's that one in the corner. Hold on, let me turn that one off. Or if you could, is your computer the one with the fans that's going? It is? Did it crash? Go ahead and shut it down and restart it. Okay. Any more questions? We're pretty clear on this so far? Okay. The next step now, if you wish to animate any of these images that you've imported, what do you do? Typically, you have to put them in, or convert them to a symbol. And the best way to describe a symbol is to have a little example here. Everybody know these little Russian dolls, these nested dolls? Instead of thinking of them as converting them, thinking of putting the image inside a container. Okay? And you can nest symbols inside symbols inside symbols, just as you can this. So if you think about it, we have our image, and when we say convert the symbol, all we're doing is that we're putting it inside a container called a symbol. But when we double click on that symbol or that container, we, just as we did with some of the other objects that we had, when they were groups, it's the same principle. We said this is a group, and when you double click on the group, all you're doing is looking inside that container called a group to see the shape object inside it. So you're just putting it inside a container, and you always have access to the original inside the container to edit it, modify it, do whatever. But as soon as it's inside this container has certain properties that will allow you to animate it in ways that you couldn't otherwise, especially when we start to work with graphic symbols and we work not necessarily buttons. There's three different kinds of symbols. There are graphic symbols, there are buttons, and there are movie clips. Movie clips are the most powerful, and they're probably the ones that are used most often now, but we're going to start with graphic symbols. Okay? So everybody sort of get the idea. I'm going to put this image aside for a moment, but I want to show you how we can animate this later. I'm going to create a brand new file. And I'm going to take an image like we've done before, and I'm going to convert it to a symbol. But I will have, you'll say, well, if I've done it one way, why would I want to do it another way? Sometimes it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. You could use a shape tween, or you could use a motion tween. So let me start by selecting the oval tool. And I think I'm just going to create a nice little gradient on the inside, like so. And I'm going to change, I have an option up here to select gradient wait a minute, what do I want to do here? Where did it go? Where did it go? Oh, I know where it is. No, where did it go? Just use the fill bucket. There we go. Move here. There, so it looks a little bit more like a sphere. okay? Now, I can do this a number of different ways. This is a shape object, correct? Everybody knows it's a shape object because when I select it, you can see the selection mesh. So if I want, let's ask ourselves the two questions. I want it to go from point A to point B. That's one question. And I want it, how long do I want it to take place? I want it to take place over about a second. Okay, so this is where it starts. Now I select frame 20, and I insert timeline keyframe. And now at this point in time, I want it to move over here. So this is where it is on point A. This is where it is on point B. So how do I get this to animate? It is a shape object. The only kind of tween I can use is a shape tween. So I'll click a frame in between, click and select shape, and voila. It moves from point A to point B. And if I hit Command Return, notice that it just repeats again and again and again, 20 frames per second. Okie doke. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to take this object. I'm going to take just one of these, and I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to lock this layer, and I'm going to paste it onto the next layer. This one, however, I'm going to convert to a symbol. So to do that, and there are a couple of ways that we can convert the symbol. I can either create the object on the stage first, or I can go inside my library and create a new symbol and create it from there. I prefer creating it on stage first. That's just my preference. But we'll do both ways. So I have the object selected, and now I can select Modify, Convert to Symbol, or hit F8. And it asks me, what kind of symbol do you want? And I need to name it. So I'll name it red ball, and I want to make sure it's a graphic symbol. And I click OK, and you'll notice that I have that red ball inside my library now. What's the advantage to this? There are a number. Even if I'm going to make it go from point A to point B, just that. Because just as we mentioned a moment ago, when I imported an image, I can bring as many of those images out on stage as I want without really adding to the file size. The same here. I have my original red ball in my library, and I can bring out as many instances / copies of that as I want. In it, by bringing out copies, it minimizes the file size. So it's really a better way to go. Notice the difference between these two. When I selected the shape object, I saw the selection mesh, didn't I? When you select a symbol, look at the difference. And it's different from a group. When you select a symbol, you'll notice that similar to a group, we have the blue bounding box around it. But where it's different from a group is we have the little crosshairs in the middle. We can also tell what kind of symbol this is just by simply looking in our Properties panel when it's selected. It tells me it's a graphic symbol. There's another way of telling that this is a graphic symbol, and that's by the little icon that represents it. This little square, you'll notice inside, is a red circle, a blue square, and I think it's a blue triangle. See what this looks like here and here? That lets you know that it is a graphic symbol. When we use movie clips and we use buttons, the symbol will look different, that little icon. Now I'm going to do a very similar thing. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make it go from point A to point B. So I select the next point in my timeline, and I insert timeline just as I did before, keyframe, and now I move it in place down here, and I want to have it move, not just jump from point A to point B, but move smoothly from point A to point B. So just as I did with the Shape Tween, I click in between, and I select now a motion tween. Shape tweens are only used between two shape objects and for no other purpose. Motion tweens will be used for everything else. So now, notice the difference. And it's a subtle difference, but now you'll notice that this top tween, which is a motion tween, has a lavender background. You'll notice that they're both working properly because we have the solid arrow. If I go ahead and I test the movie, they look identical to one another. Now, if you're only going to do it one time, you might ask yourself, why would I want to, what difference does it make? And it probably doesn't. 6 of one, a half a dozen of the other. But what if I wanted to repeat this over and over and over again? I wanted a bunch of balls animated. What I can do is I can place this animation inside a symbol. Symbols can contain animation. Okay, and they will have their own timeline. So what I can do is I can go ahead and I can select all of these, select all of these frames. And I can go ahead and edit. I can timeline, wait a minute, edit timeline, and I can say copy frames. Now what I'm going to do from my library is I'm going to create new symbol. And I want it to be a graphic symbol, and I will name it Anim Ball for animated ball. And I'll click OK. And look at the difference from what I had before. When I created the symbol before, I'd already made it on the stage. Now notice that my stage temporarily disappears. I'm inside that container called Anim Ball. Now I can click here on the timeline, and I can go to Edit, and I can select Edit Timeline, and I can say Paste Frames. Now notice I have my animation contained inside that animation. Now you'll notice another place too. Notice that you no longer see the stage. Notice also the little crosshair in the middle. That lets me know that that's the middle of my or the center of that symbol. Also notice here, similar to what we had with our groups, I am inside something called a graphic symbol named Anim Ball. When I click back to my stage, I have what I had before. But you'll notice inside my library, I have the Anim Ball, and I have the red ball. What's the difference between these? Notice that when I select the library item, Anim Ball, I can click here, and notice it allows me to see that animation. And now when I want to bring it onto the stage, I'll go ahead and this is a safety measure, I'll make a brand new layer, and I'll lock the other one so I don't accidentally add it. I'm going to go ahead and bring Anim Ball on the stage, and you can see that it takes up this amount of space. And I'm going to go ahead and I'll move it over here, like so. Now watch. Let's go ahead and play this again and watch what happens. Notice that I only have one keyframe here. But I have just populated frames for the duration of this. And watch what happens when I play it. Notice that the animation is now built into Anim Ball. Now, why would I want to do that? And this is the best part of it. I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new layer on top of this one. And I'm going to go ahead and this is going to get pretty cluttered. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to show you how you can, I'm kind of winging it at the moment now. I'm going to go off on a tangent. I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new file. And this is one of the advantages of having, another advantage of having elements in a library. You'll notice in our new file we have no library items, but Untitled 4, but you'll notice that I have access to my library of Untitled 3, Untitled 2, and Untitled 1. So any other libraries that are open, or I can also export the libraries as well.
Creates a new library every time you create a new
Right.
project.
But you have access to the others if you wish. So you don't have to recreate them.
As long as we have the other ones open.
You can export the libraries, so you can import from other files. So let's go back to this one. So I have that one, and notice here's the anim ball, and I'll bring this one out, and we'll move it over. Let's bring it out again, like so. And this one I'm going to shrink in size a little bit, just to show you that what we're doing is we're bringing copies or instances out of that library item. And you can do this with any library item. But this would be, if you were wondering why would you do an animation of use a motion tween as opposed to a shape tween, this would be it. So now I can use it multiple times, and I have the flexibility of making revisions to it as well. I can modify the properties of that tween. And one of the things might be to go ahead and transform this. So now if I reduce this in size, I can have a little bitty one here. And let's bring it out again. Maybe I want this one to have be slightly different color. This doesn't work really great, but it does work. You'll notice that I have the graphic symbol selected. When I look at my properties panel, in the color panel, or the color menu over here, I can select, let's select tint. And now we can select from here, and I can select any number. I can select, maybe I just want it to be blue instead. Now it removes the gradation, so that's not so good. But I've changed quite a few things. Let me bring it out one more time, and let's affect the alpha of this overall. Maybe I want to change alpha, and notice that it is 34%. Now let's play all of them. Let's go ahead and command return. Whoops, come on. Command return. There we go. And nothing. Oh, I know why. Nothing happens. No, there's a reason why nothing happened, and it's again, I guess that's one of those middle-aged mental moments. But no, it's very simple. When you have animation embedded in a graphic symbol, the animation in that graphic symbol is, while it is in its own timeline, that timeline is linked to the main timeline. So what do I mean? If I select any one of these instances and I double click in here, notice that I'm no longer on the main timeline because these other instances have grayed out, and it states, and it shows me here, I'm inside the timeline of that symbol, anim ball. If I go back out to the main scene, what I have to do on the main scene, I have to make sure that my movie is the same length as, I have the same number of populated frames as I do inside that graphic symbol. And the graphic symbol had 20 populated frames. So I still need to select frame 20 and insert timeline frame. That's all I need to do. Now it will allow it to play. When we get to movie clips, that will not be the case. But now when I go ahead and I play that, you'll see that it's the same symbol, but I've altered the properties of each of the instances of that symbol. I have changed the size, I have changed the color, I have changed the alpha. And I can change, I could have done that for just one instance. I could have changed the size, alpha, and color for just one of them, but I've chosen to do it for 3. So you can bring out as many of these as you like. And what you're doing is you minimally change the file size when you do so. That's the advantage to building animation inside a symbol, as opposed to using Shape Tweens. And for every Shape Tween that you have on your main stage, you would probably have to create a separate layer. You would probably have to create a separate animation for each of those. It would probably be better to make that, if you want a morph to go from A to B, if we wanted the letter to change from a square to an A or a W or whatever I did, it would be better to put that animation, it might be a Shape Tween, inside a graphic symbol. Does everybody follow that? Let me go ahead and do that. So I'm going to create a brand new file. Let me see where I am with my time on the movie. And I'm kind of following the textbook, and I kind of am not. I have 14 minutes left, so I think I can do it in that time. Okay. So there's a variety of ways that we can work. As I said, I can start, if I want to start by creating a brand new symbol, I can do that. I can go ahead and start from my library and just create a brand new symbol. And it will be a graphic symbol, and we'll call it morph animation. Now you no longer see the stage, and you'll notice that I'm inside that symbol. It's an empty container, but I'm inside it just the same. You see the little crosshair in the middle, which tells me where the middle of my animation is. You also see up here that I'm inside something called morph anim. So notice that it has its own timeline. So I'll start by creating a rectangle, and I'm going to make this a nice bright green. Whoops. And using the crosshair for the center of it, make a nice green square. I want this to morph into an M or a W or something, or some other letter. Remember we did this the other day. So that's what I want it to do. I want it to happen over 20 frames or 1 second. So what I'll do now is insert timeline, keyframe or blank keyframe? Blank keyframe. I don't know where the square is, so what do? I click on onion skinning so I can see back in time. Now at this point in time, what I can do is I can select my letter. Okay, click here, make sure that it's centered, static text, what kind of impact was a good one. I'll go ahead and just click here, and I probably want a different color. I'll make it black just for the heck of it. Okay, and I'll type M. Okay, and let's move it in place. And in order for this to tween, what did I need to do to the letter to morph? I needed to break apart, didn't I? So Command B for break apart, or go to Modify, Break Apart. So now it's no longer editable text. And I move it in place, and if I want it larger, I can use the free transform tool and make it a little bit bigger, like so. That looks pretty good. Okay, so I'm ready to morph the green square to the letter M. So I can turn off onion skinning, and I can apply the tween. What kind of tween do I apply? I'm inside a graphic symbol. Shape. You always apply the type of tween to what you're actually applying it to. I'm applying it to a shape, so I apply it as a shape tween. Even though I'm inside a graphic symbol, it doesn't matter. I'm applying the tween to a shape object, so I use a shape tween. So now it's morphing, and now let's quickly apply my shape hint, and hopefully the shape hint will work this time. So let's go to Modify, Shape, Add Shape Hint, and let's move it to the upper left-hand corner. Let's move here. Let's move this to the upper left-hand corner. Ooh, that's a good sign. Let's go back again, and let's add another one for good measure. Shape, add Shape Hint, and let's add a second one. Move it in the upper left-hand corner, or upper right-hand corner. Move this one in the upper right-hand corner. That's good. That's a nice tween. Now let's go back out onto our scene. No symbol. That's because I generated that symbol from within the library. But now look what I can do. I can pull as many of these guys out of here as I want. And I just need to make sure that it's 20 frames long. Modify, insert timeline frame. Now watch, we can go ahead and play this. That's the advantage to putting even a morph type of shape tween inside a symbol, because I can use it again and again and again as many times as I want, and I can change properties of it. I'm running out of time with my video, so I want to turn that off, but I'm more than happy once I'm turned that off to redo this as many times as we need. I probably need to take a quick break. We should all take a quick break, maybe 10 minutes, come back, and then we can review this some more. And review anything else that we've covered up to this point. Importing, do whatever.